Well, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today is the first episode of season 4 on our podcast, which really is crazy. We were talking earlier just how far we've come in this podcast. I don't remember if I was having a conversation with you or Sean or somebody, just thinking about like, you remember the early days of this thing? We had the 3 cameras. We had Jorge come in, like set up the whole deal.
That's right.
And we're still iterating. We're still learning and figuring some things out. I like the one camera. It makes it easier for editing, but we'll come up with some fun stuff.
He does all the editing. I mean, he spends a lot of time on that.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I remember with those like 3 cameras and stuff, it was substantial. But nowadays, there's so much in the programs that make it simpler. So it's just one of those things that we enjoy doing. But I'll say when we take a break for the summer and there's no podcast, I'm like, what? I have some free time. This is nice. But man, it is really, really good to be back. I want to introduce, if you're new, my name is Kyle. I'm the student minister here, and my co-host is Michael Hollis, our preaching minister. So how are you?
I am doing great, man. I'm doing great. Of course, you've been tempting me this morning. Well, I shouldn't say you.
I didn't do anything. I'm an innocent bystander.
Melissa's been tempting us. She is a great cook, our secretary, and she made some cinnamon rolls. Of course, you were kind enough not to bring them in the office.
I did.
I appreciate that.
I left them in there.
But like, that's all I can think about now. The cinnamon rolls that are in there.
I've had about half of the ones. And the problem is they're mini. They're mini size, which means like you have to eat 4 or 5 of them for them really like to count.
She thought she was doing us a favor by doing that. I said, if you tell an alcoholic you have only mini bottles, that doesn't mean he's going to drink all of them, right?
That's the truth. Yeah. So I have eaten more of those than I had intended to.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning and was like, I'm going to eat good. I brought my lunch again. I'm going to do great.
I say that every morning.
And then Melissa brings cinnamon rolls, and it just kind of threw the whole thing down the drain. But that's okay. That's okay. So this series of our podcast is going to be a little bit different than series in the past. The season of our podcast. What we would like to do for this episode and then some of the others is to begin talking about the sermons that we have on Sundays, because you know this really, really well. There is so much that doesn't make it into a sermon. Like truly, like I don't know how many pages you use. I know how many words I put into a sermon, and there's always something that I'm like, I'm gonna have to cut that.
I'm always paring it down a lot. Yeah, it starts out about an hour and a half.
Let's go. Come on, let's do that one Sunday. I exaggerate
a little bit, but
let's do that one Sunday. Because nowadays there are preachers that do that. I mean, like 2-hour sermons, and I'm like, it's like a full-length feature film every single week. But what we'd like to do is we want to take what we talk about on Sundays, and you and I have been wrestling with this a lot. Is let's take the concepts and the ideas. Let's take the 30,000 foot and let's bring it down to the real world, and let's give people frameworks. Let's give people practicality on. What does this look like on Tuesday? What does this look like in the life of our church? So will you, before I read the scripture, will you just give our listeners like a snapshot, an elevator pitch, if you will, of what this series has been all about?
Sure. The series we just did, Stronger Together, it was motivated by, first of all, I felt led by God to do the series because we have something great is happening at Palmetto. We have a lot of diversity.
Yeah, we do.
You and I talked about that this morning. We have folks who come from, like you and I did, from the very conservative side of our movement. Yeah. We have folks who come from the more progressive side of our movement. And then, as we like to say, we have folks who have never been a part of our movement, who don't know much of it, if anything, about the Church of Christ. And I think it's a beautiful testimony of the grace of God. It's a great way for us to demonstrate how Jesus unites and brings us together. And so there is that opportunity that's there, and we're doing great with it, really, I believe so. There also can be challenges that come with that when you try to bring a group together who are theologically kind of diverse. And so I wanted to do a series that hit on at least the principles of unity. What does unity cost? And so we went to Romans chapter 12, and that was our main text for the entire 3-week sermon series. And we started out by saying, as Paul starts out in Romans chapter 12, in view of God's mercy, he says, therefore, in view of God's mercy. And so for 11 chapters, he had been setting up talking about the mercy of God, the grace of God, in order to get to the unity part. He wanted to provide a foundation that said, begin by looking at each other through God's mercy, just as God looks at you. Mm-hmm. Unity begins right there.
Right.
And then he talks about overcoming our pride, not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought to think. So pride has to be set aside for unity. You have to have that kind of humble spirit. He also talks about how you treat one another. He talks about both in the church and outside the church, how you treat one another, what the price that you have to pay for peace. And so the sermon series was really about giving the 30,000-foot view of the type of heart that's required for people who are really diverse to have unity and to display unity. Because I think unity is pretty important. At least Jesus says unity is pretty important.
I would think so, which kind of leads us to this prayer that Jesus prays. He's in the garden and he's on his way to the cross. And he has this long prayer that has unity peppered through the entire thing.
Yes.
And really, there's a couple of verses that kind of stand out as we've been talking about this podcast in particular. In John 17:20 and 21, he says, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message." So he's been talking about his disciples, the people who've been following him. Verse 21 says, "That all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me." Which gives me this image that unity is this representation of the gospel. It is the natural overflow of the gospel. Yeah. And if we're not united, then it really makes us, it damages our credibility. Yeah. If we can't unite and we can't come together, then why in the world would anybody actually want to be a part of it? I mean, I think Jesus understood that. I think Jesus understood the gravity of what was going to come, both like in the near future for his disciples, but also for us centuries later. Just to think about, I mean, look at our country, look at our world, look how like divided we are. Look how, I mean, on any given subject, I mean, from what football team to your political party, you name it, we don't have unity on it. But I've always asked the question, like, how could the church be a beacon of unity in the midst of so much disunity? That's way messier and way more difficult than we'd like for it to be. I'm a bit of an idealist in a lot of ways, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. But yeah, I love this text from John 17.
Yeah, I mean, that's powerful. Our unity is essential to our witness, that we can either prove or disprove the power of the gospel for our unity. The world will look at us and say, hey, the gospel is really not powerful. What Christ said he could do, bring peace and reconciliation and healing to people who are divided, is not really the case.
Right.
If we have disunity, if we're not together. Yeah. And so it all begins there. And that's why I think every church has to pursue unity. Right. And when you're in a context of a church where there are a lot of varying theological beliefs, you have to decide how much grace, that's not the way, how much grace do you give is what I started to say. You've got to give as much grace as God gives you. Yeah. And so you have to think about that. But you really have to decide individually sometimes, not only as a congregation, but individually, what's a hill worth dying on? Yeah, I've used that phrase for a long time because we haven't always done well in fulfilling Jesus' prayer in John 17, right? Yeah. You know, we've had too much disunity in the church, and it's been over the Bible, over doctrinal matters and what we believe. And I've always struggled with what is essential and what is non-essential. Where do you draw the line?
Right.
I believe as I've gotten older and as I've studied the Bible longer, I've come to understand more, I think, what's essential and non-essential. I told you, in fact, I shared with you before we started, I'm not going to mention his name, but it's a member here at Palmetto, a good friend of mine, who said that over the last 25 years, his view of what's essential has changed. And he described it this way. He said, imagine yourself packing for a trip and you're carrying everything you think you're going to have for that trip. And you've got bag after bag after bag and you're toting it through the airport. You're just weighed down. And he said, that's the way it was for me initially in my Christian walk. Nearly everything was absolutely essential, especially for unity. But he says now, if I remember correctly, he either said, I've got one suitcase or I've just got a backpack. He said that what he believes is essential for unity has really been pared down due to his understanding. Right. Now, everybody has to do this for themselves.
Right.
I think when we talked about what's our purpose here, what do we want to do today, we want to help people have a theological framework so that they can decide for themselves what's essential and what's not essential.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I love that image of travel, because I'm somebody who I actually prefer to take one bag when I travel. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's actually really hard because you have to decide, what am I going to put in it? Like what's most important to put in this bag?
Yeah.
So that really resonates with me. And I always laugh at the people when I'm going through the airport, when they've got the huge, massive suitcase and the bag and the purse, and for some reason they're carrying their dog with them. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way that you need all of that stuff. Usually you put on just one bag, you have just your essentials, and you feel lighter.
Yeah. Your
back doesn't hurt as much. Like, it's an easier trip. You can move more freely through the airport.
Yeah.
You have some flexibility. And I'm feeling a lot of connections to what this could look like in church. Imagine if you freed yourself up from having to carry so much. And man, I've got to make sure I've got this and this and this. Suddenly you can't move. You can't move through the world and actually live the way you were intended to live because you're worried. And did I forget that other thing? And do I have this and whatever? Man, I'm really glad you told that story, because that's really kind of resonating with me this morning.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you like me at one point in your spiritual walk, you probably had a whole lot of baggage.
Oh yeah.
And the longer your list of essentials are, the longer it is, the smaller your fellowship group.
Yeah.
The longer list of things I have that are a must, then the fewer people I have to agree with. And so your fellowship circle shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And I know we've talked about that in the past.
Yeah.
But the key is then how do you determine what you hang on to and what you don't hang on to? Mm-hmm. I was sharing with you too about a guy by the name of Albert Mohler, mm-hmm. who has this idea called theological triage. And I really love the way he puts that. I don't agree with him in everything. He's got a book about a hill worth dying on. I don't agree with everything in the book, but I love the way he at least attempts to decide what's essential, what's non-essential. Because, growing up in the Church of Christ, in our movement, there was a saying that says, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, how does it go?
Liberty.
Liberty. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty, but in all things, love. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the guiding light, if you will, mm-hmm. for our unity movement within the churches of Christ.
Yeah.
It's a really good saying. There's a lot to be commended for that. But I got to thinking about that. I don't think you can divide everything into essential and non-essential in that way. I like the way that this guy does it with the triage picture a whole lot better, because the fact that a doctrine might not be essential for salvation doesn't mean that it's not essential for your growth.
Right. That's good.
So if you just have those two categories, it's like you're taking some things that are really important and you're saying, it's just really non-essential. No, but there are some things that are more essential than others.
Yeah.
Doctrine is not all flat. Mm-hmm. We know that Jesus talked about, those who had the greater sin. There were two commands that were greater than all the others. All doctrine is not flat, although some tend to make it that way. Yeah. So I think, and the way that he structures this about the theological triage in the medical world, if you're involved in that, you know that if you're in an emergency room and you've got patients coming in with different levels of hurt, of complaint, that you take care of those who are in need the most. Right. In other words, they're the ones, if you don't do this, they're going to die soon. But you've got somebody over here who's got a broken arm, they can wait while you take care of the person that's bleeding out over here. So you have to decide which is most important that you have to take care of. That's kind of the idea behind the theological triage. It assumes that some doctrines are more important than others, and it assumes that some needs are urgent.
Right.
That there are some things that connect you to Christ, that connect you to salvation, that are important for salvation. There are other things that they're important. A broken arm's pretty important.
Right.
You need to take care of that, but it's not something that at the moment is life or death.
Right.
Like if I was going to say something that's life or death, Jesus said, unless you repent, you'll perish. That's one of those get out of the house on fire type deals. And he breaks it down into 4 categories. And his 4 categories, and I'll try to go through them very quickly. And again, this is not original with me. I'm just finding it helpful. Is the first category is the essential doctrines, meaning this is tied to the gospel. This is about your salvation, essential for us. Belief in the deity of Jesus might be one of those. These are things that produce faith. They're really in that Christological realm about who Jesus is, what he did, about the nature of Jesus. Those are things that are essential. I always go back to John chapter 8, where Jesus said, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Growing up, I believe that meant you'll know the truth about how to organize the church. You'll know the truth about all of these different, once you get all of these doctrines right, you'll be set free. But just 2-3 verses later, he says, if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. The truth that sets you free is a who, not a what. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So these are doctrines. The essentials, in my view, are about Jesus and who he is. He is the one who brings salvation. And then the second category is the urgent doctrines. These are doctrines that are essential to the health of the individual, the health of the church. We wouldn't call them the essential, but these are often beliefs that flow out of the gospel itself. If you look at the book of Acts, till you get to chapter 10, you've got a prejudiced church. It took an act of God and a miracle for the Jews to accept the Gentiles into the kingdom of God. Now, you and I would say the doctrine that says all are created equal, that no matter the color of your skin, no matter your race, where you're at, that's a pretty important doctrine, and that it flows out of the gospel of Christ, that he died in order to do that. And yet you have the church at the beginning, like I say, until you get to chapter 10, that is a church not accepting Gentiles in the kingdom of God. Now, were they still saved? I believe so. Is God being patient with them, teaching them, trying to help them to learn? Yes. But that is an urgent doctrine, but it doesn't have to do with being saved. It's something you do because you are saved. See, and that's really one of the ways you differentiate here. Worship is something that you do because you are saved, not in order to be saved. You take the Lord's Supper, which I think is an urgent doctrine. The Eucharist is an urgent doctrine. It's very important, depending on which different denominations think different ways about that. But yet I take the Lord's Supper not in order to be saved, but because I am saved. See, the essential doctrines, you must believe this, you must do this in order to be saved. The urgent doctrines are, you do this because you are saved to grow in the image of Christ. It's the sanctification area. Then his other category is doctrines that are important. So he goes from essential, urgent, important. They're theologically important, not important enough to divide over. Millennium, the afterlife. Is there going to be a new heaven and a new earth? Are we just going to be in heaven? All of those things. Those are not things that we ought to divide over for sure. And then he says unimportant doctrines, things that are not commanded or forbidden by Scripture. Scripture doesn't talk about. How many song leaders we have would be one. Of course, there's some, other denominations that would put instrumental music in that category, right? So I find that to be a helpful way, and there are other ways to do it, and maybe we'll talk about those too, of determining what's essential and what's non-essential here. Just providing a basic framework,
Yeah. The challenge that I've always had with some of these, like we talked about back in December, I don't remember if it was December of 21 or 22, when we talked about like the big rocks, little rocks, the gravel, the sand, things like that. You've got to put the big rocks in first so that you can actually fit everything else in. If you start with the sand, well, you're not going to have any room for the big rocks, those kinds of things, placing a higher importance. But the challenge that I've always had is what happens, like, as you mentioned, what happens when you and I put a belief, a practice, whatever, in two different categories? What happens when something that you hold as urgent, I put as unimportant? What if something, because I think most people can agree on the essentials, or at least most of the essentials. We might elevate some things to get them there, but I don't think there are any well-meaning disciples of Jesus that are going to say, deity of Jesus, that's just in the important category. Like, that's not essential. But there are plenty of well-meaning disciples of Jesus that would put worship styles or church structure or whatever in an essential category when it really doesn't need to be. The challenge for me is, how do I walk with those people? And how do we walk together when we don't agree on those things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's that which saves you, and there's that which grows you.
Right.
And we believe, as do many Christians across the world, Christ followers, we believe our salvation is in Jesus alone, that we add nothing to it. You know, we often sing the song, "Nothing in my hand I bring." You can add nothing to it. And so that's the upper tier. That Jesus alone is our salvation. Now, in our movement, there would be some in that top category, essential doctrine, would say, okay, tell me where baptism fits in that.
Right. Yeah.
If you had someone who maybe they're Baptist, for instance, they might put the sinner's prayer in that essential doctrine part and say, oh yeah, you can't. I've already mentioned one that I think is essential. Jesus said, unless you repent, you'll perish. I would put that in the essential part. Is it a response to what Jesus did? Absolutely. At the same time, we have to be clear that only Jesus saves. In other words, baptism, Colossians 2 and verse 12 says, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through your faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Not through your faith in baptism, but through your faith in the working of God. In other words, our faith is not in baptism. It is the working of God through Christ. So even when we talk about these things that we say, these are essential to express your faith. Jesus said, you better repent or you'll perish. We believe that baptism is what Jesus did. As his followers, we follow him into it. We dare not, though, make that expression of faith what saves us. What saves us is the act of Jesus himself. Right. And we even differ on the modes of that baptism. I was reading the other day, and we've talked about this, I think, before, but the early Christians in the first 1 or 2, maybe 3 centuries, I don't remember, maybe help me with that. Some believed in being baptized in the nude. No clothes on. Right now, of course, they did it and separate. The men were separate from the women.
They kept that, but yeah, pretty interesting.
That challenged your convictions, right there. It really would challenge your convictions. But but they believed that, hey, this is important. That running water was considered in mode of baptism for many to be important. That was the example that we had in Scripture was running water. You need to do that, and so there have been times we don't differ over the need for baptism itself, but the mode is where we get into it.
Right.
And that is where we've got to be careful and see things through the mercy of God. I had somebody say one time, listen, if a person, when they're baptized, doesn't know or doesn't believe it's for the forgiveness of sins, then their baptism is invalid. And they go to Acts 2:38 and say, see, it's for... Now, here's the challenge with that. If you believe that you must understand exactly everything baptism means when you're baptized, there's another phrase that follows the forgiveness of sins, and that is you'll receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. How many of us go to pains to make sure before we baptize someone, they understand what it means to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit? I mean, how much into that theology do you get before you baptize somebody? Chances are they know very little, or if nothing, about the indwelling of the Spirit. They may have heard the Spirit's going to indwell them, know very little about it. In other words, there are even these basic things regarding the nature of Christ and who he is that you grow into once you make that confession of faith in Christ. So we do not depend on our intellectual acuity for our salvation. We depend on the efficacy of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ.
That's good.
And so what is essential? Is growing in Christ essential? I think it is. But man, there are different rates of growth in Christ. There are going to be those who come with all kinds of baggage, and I'm not talking about just doctrinal baggage. I'm talking about moral baggage and understanding. A person who comes to Christ doesn't understand sexuality. We said that God gave the church in the beginning all that time to, and still some of them didn't, to understanding that Gentiles are accepting the kingdom. All right, how long does God give someone if they come and they're baptized into Christ, but they don't understand sexual purity? And maybe they're living in a situation where the sexual purity is not there, and they're struggling with that and understanding with that, and that's difficult. Let me say one more thing about this, and we have to be careful not to expect people to learn everything all at once. We have to give them the benefit of the doubt, because there are those who are going to grasp something immediately, and there are going to be those who, but here's the key. If I go to a passage of Scripture or a teaching on morality, and I see what the Bible is teaching, and I understand it, and then I refuse to do it, that's very different. That is being rebellious. Rebellious is very different from having a lack of understanding. And I would say there's a different line there, that one cannot live in constant, continual rebellion to God and keep their faith, that eventually erodes your faith. And that's the danger with not believing doctrine is important. You know, we talked about before this how there are some people who want to argue about every doctrine. There are some people who don't want to argue about any. You know, what's that quote someone had? I had to write it down because an old saying, there's no doctrine a fundamentalist won't fight over, and no doctrine a liberal will fight over. You know, there's a sweet spot in between those two extremes. But we have to understand that no matter where you fall on certain issues, it is not that you figured them out. It's what saves you. It's Jesus Christ that saves you.
Yeah. You know, we baptized 2 kids this weekend. On our retreat. You know, we didn't talk about that at the beginning, but we were gone for an annual retreat. We call it Restore at the beach every year. And inevitably, you know, we're over the course of the weekend, there are students who start asking questions about giving their lives to Jesus and things. And for the past 2 years, we have this late night worship time. And for the past 2 years, one or more of our students has walked up to me and wanted to have a conversation during that time. So I'm not an ocean person. I don't like the ocean when I can't see what's in the ocean.
The same way.
I've been in the Florida ocean one time and I could see it. It was amazing. But like South Carolina beach, can't see. So I'm like, hey, is there, you know, once we had the conversation and wanted to go baptize these students, I'm looking for a pool, because I'm like, you know, 3-4 feet of water, I can see we're good. And unfortunately the pool's closed. So we're wandering out into the dark ocean with flashlights. But that's a whole nother side note. But we get into the water, and one of the important questions that I always ask, is, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe that he is who he said that he was? Do you believe that he lived this life? All the things. But a follow-up question that I don't think we ask as often is, are they ready to make Jesus their Lord? Are they willing to give him full say? Are they willing to let him be the one who has final authority in everything? And that comes for me the more important question. And really, I think that's the one that we're trying to get to in this conversation is, are we the kind of people who, regardless of what the issue is, regardless of what the topic of conversation, whether we would categorize it as essential or not, or whatever, are we willing to collectively say that Jesus is Lord and he gets final say?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, his rule, his reign, his authority, his identity is the most important thing. And I think that's where everything else gets tricky if we are not focused on that singular thing. Now, the beauty, you know, we talked earlier, our church right now is in this really interesting space where, man, we've got so many different, I mean, we'll have something happen on a Sunday, or we'll say something or whatever. And it's like we hear from both sides, like almost simultaneously. Somebody loved it and somebody was like, what in the world is going on? But I think that's an opportunity. I don't think that's something to be afraid of, something to worry about, anything like that. I think it means that your church is reflecting what the larger kingdom of God is. what does the larger kingdom of God looks like? It's really stinking diverse. Read Revelation. Every tribe and nation and tongue and language and all the things, they're there, which means every theological viewpoint, they're there. That means every political party there. Like all of those things are reflected here, which means all of these people who have collectively said, Jesus is my Lord, and he gets the final say, we can have all of these other conversations. And I don't want us to come away from conversations like this one that are like, well, guess we're just going to be debating for the rest of our lives. We got to figure this out. Like, no, let's just say you and I, we're going to collectively say that Jesus is the most important thing. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I want to look more like him tomorrow than I did today. And sure, we'll have some really good conversations along the way. I was listening to something recently. There was a church who had made a big theological decision, one that not a lot of churches have been through, at least definitely not in our tribe. But I think it's an important one. And they get up and they're having these lectures. Here's where we are. Here's after 6 months of dedicated study. We have this group of people, whatever. Here's where we've come to on this thing. And at the beginning of this presentation, the pastor gets up and he says, okay, there's a professor at this university and he has another framework very similar to the one that you put from Al Mohler. And he calls it die for, divide for, debate for, and decide for. And that's how we make decisions based on whatever the conversation is. Mm-hmm. So he says, die for, like, these are the things that people literally would have been martyred for. You don't see people getting martyred because they were, an a cappella church or whatever. Like they got martyred because they believed that Jesus was Lord and that he overcame death. Right. Divide for, like, these are the things that, okay, they're really weighty. He would say, he used examples like sexuality. How do we define sexuality? Right. This church was a very spirit-driven church. So he would say that he even would include like cessationism of spiritual gifts versus practice. Like, how do we divide on those things or not? Debate for, this is my favorite one because it's like they're important and they're weighty, but like at the end of the day, like, we can just have a really good conversation about them, come away, and it doesn't, we don't have to divide. You and I can think differently, but this is where it's like predestination versus free will. Should you take the Lord's Supper every Sunday or on Thursdays or whatever, administration of the sacraments, things like that. But like good theological conversations, but we're brothers at the end of the day. And then my favorite one is decide for. Because like, okay, we can make a decision and it has no bearing whatsoever. What version of the Bible should you use? Like the one that you're going to read, of course. What worship style should you have? The one that's authentic and connects you to God. Like those kinds of conversations. And I appreciated that framework and also the one that you had there because it gives us just a lens to see this stuff through. That's right. You elevate Jesus to the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And then we have a framework for how we deal with everything else, whether it's the big rocks or the theological triage or this one or whatever. I love that we have all of these resources at our fingertips to move through life and move through these conversations with.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. I mean, our only hope, my only hope, I think everyone's only hope is the grace of God through Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Theologically, there is not one of us that's going to be pure theologically. Well, that reminds me of there was a little cartoon somebody had posted online that just kind of hit me about this. Did I already share this with you?
I don't think so.
No, I didn't. I've got to bring it up here, but I know you won't be able to see it online there.
This is real time. I love this.
This is real time here, but Jesus has a child right there that he's got his arm around. And the child says, Jesus, why am I the only one here in heaven with you? And Jesus says, everyone else's theology was slightly off. So it is a digging, sarcastic meme on how that there are those who feel if your theology is not exactly right, then you have no chance of being saved. And so they put all the weight on their own shoulders rather than on the efficacy of Jesus and his sacrifice. Yeah. At the end of the day, we've got to treat one another with the same mercy that we receive and that we hope we'll receive. which means I give you all kinds of grace because I know about myself.
Right.
Morally, intellectually, I know that I am far from what I should be.
Right.
And so if we'll just approach each other that way through the lens of the mercy of God, Romans chapter 12, so many of our things we'll debate, we'll talk, we'll disagree. There may even be some heated disagreements at times, right. But in the end, we're going to say, you're my brother, you're my sister. Yeah. Even times when, just as in Scripture, we've seen where you have to part ways with somebody because this is one of those doctrines that is very important. That doesn't mean that you no longer call them your brother or sister in Christ. Mm-hmm. It just means this is a doctrine that I hold so dear that I can't with good conscience follow with that.
Right. Right now in our church, we are in a period of time where all of our classes are talking about relationships. Yeah. Whether it's parenting or marriage or whatever it is, we're all talking about relationships. And what we're doing in our student ministry class for the month of September in particular is we're talking about the spiritual practice of community and the ways that being invested in a community over a long term will form you and others to look more like Jesus. And I can't help but kind of come to this as we think about, man, we got to give people mercy. We've got to look at people through the grace of God, all the things. If you're not invested in relationship with people, if we're not invested in community with people, it is really hard to extend grace to them. But imagine, I'm thinking about some of our life groups right now, who I know for a fact are very diverse in a lot of different ways. I'm thinking about your life group. Your life group is very diverse, lots of different viewpoints along any given spectrum that you could come up with. Right. But what's amazing about it is it's one of the most unified life groups that I know of. And that's because you're invested in relationships with one another. You have conversations with one another. You're honest, you're authentic, you're vulnerable with each other. And it's like, I'm not going to say it makes it easier, but it just becomes more natural because when you know a person, you know their motivations, you know where they're coming from, you know that they're not just trying to twist the Bible for the sake of twisting whatever. No, they're having a legitimate wrestling with the Spirit or whatever it is. It makes giving mercy and offering a hand so much more smooth. And I can't help but think about that when we start to talk about, okay, how does this look? Because, we can talk big picture all day long. We need our church, from a big thing to be unified. We need our country to be unified. Well, how about we just focus on the 250 people that are here? Yeah. How about we talk about the 15 people that are part of your life group? How can y'all be as unified and as together as physically possible? Yeah. It's investing in community with one another. It means opening the scriptures regularly. Yeah. You cannot have a theological, scriptural conversation if you've never read the book.
That's right.
I'm not going to go to a doctor who went to 2 classes in med school and took a calligraphy class to make it look like he got a degree. I'm not going to go to him and trust him. I'm going to go to the person who regularly sits with the scriptures and regularly spends time with the Lord. Those are the people that I'm going to spend, I'm going to listen to and I'm going to learn from.
Yeah. That's part of what's neat about diversity, isn't it? That if I'm with people who only believe what I believe, I'm never really going to learn anything. Yeah. If I'm with people who have different thoughts and different angles to look at things, that's when I grow. Right. When you're not in the echo chamber is when you grow. But I love what you said about if you have a relationship with somebody, you can't dismiss them. And say that, oh, your heart's just not right. You're just stubborn. And growing up, that's what we used to think about the denominations. If they had the right kind of heart, they would see the Bible the way we see the Bible. Mm-hmm. They would organize the way we organize. They would worship the way we worship. The problem is they're rebellious. They're stubborn because, hey, it's plain. Yeah. It's black and white. Yeah. You can read it and you can see it there. Mm-hmm. And that happens when you're in an echo chamber. Yeah. When no one's challenging you, then you begin to think that all of your beliefs are right and everybody else is wrong. And that's self-righteous creeps in.
Yeah, life doesn't exist in a vacuum. Yeah. Your faith doesn't exist in a vacuum.
That's right.
So it's a matter of moving through the world and understanding your own shortcomings and recognizing that all of us are in that same boat. you can't point the finger at somebody else and just say, oh, you're being disingenuous or whatever, because there's probably a lot of places where I'm being disingenuous and I've got my own motives and I've got my own agendas for what I think is important. But yeah, I just find that community piece to be more and more important the longer we spend in this thing.
We're fallen people. And all of this is about God taking us back into his image, redeeming us through Christ, transforming us, sanctifying us through Jesus Christ so that we become the imagers that we were meant to be. And right now we're all broken, cracked icons. And that's why we struggle with getting along the way that we do. And so we just have to remember that about each other. We have to first see ourselves as a broken icon, broken imager, so that we can see others in the same light and know that the mercy of God that extends to us, we need to extend that to others.
Yeah.
And being in community and knowing that your heart is right and not attributing bad motives to your every belief that's different than mine.
Yeah.
What you've said there is so huge in that. It makes all the difference in the world. That's why one of the things we're really pushing here at Palmetto, like you said, is life groups.
I was waiting on the shameless plug. I was about to do. I was like, all right, Robbie Dittman, if you're listening, this one's for you, man. We're doing it for you.
Robbie can work life groups into any conversation. I love that about Robbie, doing that. But it's true. If you're just coming on Sunday morning and that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
And by the way, you're going to get a very distorted view of everyone's life if you're not doing life with others. You'll think they've got it all together and you're the only one messed up until you get in life with someone else and see that is not the case.
Yeah.
My wife thought preachers were perfect until she married one. Then she found out, it's definitely not the case.
Yeah. But I think, like I said, I think about y'all's life group and I'm like, imagine that somebody in your life group hears a message on Sunday and they disagree with something that you said, or they heard it wrong or whatever. Well, if they're not in relationship with you and they don't have a legitimate conversation, then they're probably in their mind, just, there goes Mike again. He's thinking about a such and such. And I just think he's crazy. And do you know he's off his rocker? But since you're in a life group and you can sit down across the table, they can be like, hey, you said something this morning that I didn't quite, can you help me with that one? Yeah. Where did you get that from? Can you, and then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And it's just, this is the way that life works.
Yeah. Or they enlighten me.
Yes.
But if I'm the type of person that's going to jump down your throat the moment you challenge me, then you'll never do that again.
Yeah.
You'll say it's not worth it.
Right.
The pain's not worth it. And we've got to be the type of people that when challenged, I know it's difficult because sometimes my first response when challenged is not always the best response.
Right.
Even at how old am I? 62 years old.
You got to think about it.
If I have to think about it. But my first response is not always my best response.
Yeah.
I've often had to go back and apologize and say, I am so sorry. I want to be better about that.
Yeah.
I want to receive things with grace when we disagree, knowing that I don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way to unity. Is to do that.
Yeah.
And it may be after a period of time talking that you never are able to agree on that subject matter. And if it's not a matter of life and death in that triage, then you and I can remain brothers.
Yeah.
Or we can remain brothers and sisters, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I definitely think that we have to learn to place unity like at the top of importance.
Yeah. Jesus did.
When we bring it all the way back to, kind of come full circle to the beginning, if Jesus is praying before he's going to go to the cross, and one of the things that he's most concerned about talking to God about is his followers being unified and being one with one another, then it's just as important now.
Yeah.
Because we might not be facing crucifixion, but we're facing a world that desperately needs Jesus, and we're facing a world that desperately needs to see that unity can in fact happen. So I think that means when you come to difficult conversations, you place unity as the ultimate goal. And even if uniformity does not happen, unity will still happen.
Yeah. One of the things that you just made me think of something that Alexander Campbell, who one of our forefathers in the Church of Christ in our movement, believed that unity was so important. In fact, he believed that that's what was worked for in our movement, bringing everyone from denominations in together, one body in Christ. That's what it was all about. He believed when that occurred, that it would usher in the millennium, that it would usher in the return of Christ. Now, you can disagree on that theology.
Yeah, there's one of those debatable matters.
But the point is, he believed that unity was going to be essential for the coming of Christ and essential for evangelism, that it was only through the unity of all believers that God's end goal would be met. Mm-hmm. So there's some power in that. While I do not believe that we have to wait for the return of Jesus until everybody agrees on everything. That's not going to happen, or even on some of the major things. But I do believe that evangelism will not happen the way it was intended to happen in this church, in any church, until we show the world the power of the gospel through our ability to get along despite our disagreements.
Unity is really compelling.
Yeah.
And I've kind of come to a place in my life where I just wanted, like, evangelism's tough, especially, try to figure out what's effective, what's not effective, whatever. Find the most compelling way to live, and it attracts people, and questions will arise, conversations will arise. So it just becomes a question for us, like, how do we live the most compelling thing? Okay, be unified, come together. And
compelling living makes compelling speech, makes your speech compelling.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's really good. I wish it was easy though. I wish it was simple, and I wish this was, we're just going to snap our fingers and we're unified. We're good.
Yeah, I mean, if you were listening to this thinking we were just going to make out a list of things, okay, here's the things that you must agree on. Here's the things that that's not what it's about.
Not even close.
There have been minds a whole lot greater than ours who have attempted to do that. And by the way, that's what the creeds were about to a large extent before the Bible was put together even. The way to bring Christians and unify them was thought to, you make these creeds of these are the essential things that we must agree on. If you go back and read some of the old creeds, they're pretty good at establishing what the essentials are. I mean, they really are. And by the way, everybody has a creed. It might not be written, but it's unwritten. Everyone does, whether you like to say that or not. Yeah. But that's what the creeds were about.
Right.
Bringing people to the essentials.
Yeah. Scott McKnight wrote a book called The Jesus Creed.
Yeah.
And it's the love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbors yourself. That's the Jesus Creed.
That's the Jesus Creed,
And he's like, all right, if you can buy into that one.
By the way, that's a great barometer of whether something's important or not. Because Jesus said all the law and prophets hang on those two commands. Yeah. It either flows out of loving God or flows out of loving your neighbor. You don't steal because you love your neighbor, right? You don't use God's name in vain because you love God. If what you're fighting over doesn't flow out of one of those two commands, it's probably not important.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
If you're... I hate to even take one thing because somebody's going to run with it and think, what's he saying? Right. Let's take something simple like, if you're going to lift your hands in worship. Okay. I know some people, this may bother some people, but if you're going to lift your hands in worship, how does that tie, to the Jesus Creed, to the two greatest commands? We sometimes make mountains out of molehills that have nothing in the world to do with the greatest commands. With loving one another.
Yeah, that's really good. I go back to the retreat, and I know our time is getting short, so we probably need to wrap it up.
How long have we gone so far?
We've gone about, we're almost at 50 minutes at this point. So if you're still listening, you're a champion.
Yeah, that's right.
You've stuck with us for a while. I wish I had a gift to give you. In fact, comment below if you've made it to the 50-minute mark. I really want to know who you people are.
Yeah.
You must be on a long drive or something like that. But, at this retreat, we were talking about how do you hear from God, particularly in the noisy world that we live in? And he gave us all these various ways that God speaks in the world. And he was using a bunch of material from Dallas Willard. So I was already tuned in. I'm like, you've won me over. You can say anything at this point and I'm on. But he gave us these filters for determining whether or not something is from God. I know this is a little bit different than what we're talking about, but I think it has.
Sure.
I think a couple of them have some things to say here. How do you know if something is from God? Does it agree with the Bible? Because God will never say something that is outside of that. Yeah. Does this make me look more like Jesus?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't really feel like God was saying, go do this thing and it's something that's immoral or it isn't helpful. Yeah. Probably not from God. Might be the enchiladas you had last night. Does my church family confirm it? So is my community of people rallying around saying, yes, this is something from the Lord? Is it consistent with how God has gifted you? Once again, how is God working in the world? If we come to if we're having a conversation about a theological topic and it's not consistent with how God has gifted his people or how God works in the world,
in that particular church,
we probably need to move away from that particular thing. And he keeps on going, but I just found that some of those filters kind of give us just some questions for prompting, like, hey, what should I think about raising hands? What should I think about miraculous spiritual gifts? What should I think about worship styles? Okay, let's filter it through. What does Scripture have to say? Does doing this thing or believing this thing, does that over the long haul make you look more like Jesus? Or does it make you formed into someone else's image? Like, that's a legitimate question to have. Does it help you invest more in community of people, or does it isolate you? So just those kinds of conversations, I think, will bring people together instead of pushing them apart.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, because everybody has a filter. We've already said that, I think, that it's either unconscious or conscious. Much better that you have a conscious filter as to how you decide these things, rather than just through your gut initial reaction for something. Because if something is new to you and you see it, I've seen this happen in worship before. If you haven't been exposed to, someone lifting their hands, the first time you see that, it might be like, whoa, man, that has to be wrong because it's distracting me. No, you're just not used to it.
Right.
It's just because you haven't seen it, because Scripture even talks about lifting holy hands. Yeah. So that's something very important to think about. Yeah. Having a filter and being very conscious about what your filter is.
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to, like, not every conversation we're going to have. In fact, I'd probably argue that most of the conversations that people have would not fall into the essential category.
That's right.
Or what was the next top one? Of course, I had it written down. The urgent. Yeah. Most of those conversations are not in those two categories.
That's right.
Most of the ones we have,
essential then urgent. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the ones are important or unimportant. Yeah. And we have a bad tendency of elevating things to a higher level than it needs to be. But I really think that's where some of these filters and some of this, hey, don't forget community kinds of reminders are even more important.
Yeah.
Because that's where, like, the real life of church comes in. We're not getting up every Sunday and be like, all right, guys, here's our theological treatise on, spiritual gifts and whatever. Like, no, most of the time it's, we did something that was a little different, or, how do we engage with this particular idea? It's the debate for, the decide for, it's usually the little rocks or the gravel that we've got to navigate through.
And whenever I'm preaching, and I know you do the same thing, I'm mostly dealing with the big rocks. I mean, when you're preaching to such a diverse crowd in age and understanding everything else, you tend to hit that's why I love podcasts like this. We're able to dig in and get a little bit deeper into it. But, the things that you hear on Sunday morning, know that you might, I wish you would have gone in deeper into that. Well, sometimes you have to take people at all their different levels when you discuss this. Yeah. And so we won't always get into the weeds on things like that. But I would encourage people to talk to us, talk to me, talk to you, talk to someone on staff, talk to one of the elders. If you have questions about where do we fall? Many times on many subjects, we don't have a congregational stance on it. Yeah. We have a lot of individual stances. The church and the leadership here accepts me, even though I see some things differently than many of them do. The same way,
totally.
As a staff, we may see things differently. Yeah. But we believe our salvation is secured in Jesus Christ and not in our getting everything right.
Mm-hmm. And we say with a resounding, like, we think it's a good thing that it's that way.
Sure.
We think it's a really good thing that we don't see everything eye to eye.
That's right.
Because if we all look the same, talk the same, acted the same, man, this is supposed to be boring. Like, it would not, and it wouldn't be compelling. Like, there's a reason that we don't look alike.
And unless you're deity, that's a really bad thing, because you're not going to get everything right. So if we're all thinking the same, we're all wrong.
Yeah.
And in many points,
That's true. That's really good. Well, we've been going for almost an hour. Like, this might set a record for us other than some of our interview episodes, but I'm really enjoying it.
Wake up. I mean, you're asleep right now.
We're going to keep this in one episode. We're not going to split it up. Okay. We're just going to put it out as a 1 hour. Because I think there's too much here that people need to hear. I think there's too much to split it up, and I really encourage people. I know I'm talking at the end. Make sure you listen to the whole thing. So if you're still here at 56,
we give a plug for my new series coming up.
Yeah, 100%.
This Sunday it's going to be called Before and After. Mm-hmm. It's about and the subtitle is The Difference Jesus Makes in Our Lives. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about, what happens, what difference is Jesus making in your life? Yeah. So the sanctification issue and how has your life changed? What does it mean when you're raised to walk in newness of life? Mm-hmm. So we're going to be dealing with all those different.
Yeah, I like that. See, I love when some of these like weightier conversations kind of filter into our lives. 'Cause it's really easy just to be like, you get to go to heaven now. Yeah. But I'm like, no. Like Jesus says there's abundant life in the here and now. Yeah. And I look forward to that. And be on the lookout for all of our listeners or our viewers on YouTube for new podcast episodes. I will not make any promises about frequency. I'm not going to come out and say every Tuesday at 6 a.m. or anything crazy like that.
Life happens.
But we'll just surprise you. We'll just surprise you. Our goal is to be consistent with these, particularly in season 4, as we kind of wrestle with extending out some of these sermon conversations and putting them into practicalities for everyday life. So I look forward to it. We've got so much exciting stuff going on. It's a little cooler outside, which means fall is coming, which I'm like, I mean, we only have fall for like 6 days here in South Carolina, but it does.
It's better here than it was in Texas, though. I'm telling you, Texas has no fall. And it's like, hot and a little less hot. That's really what it was.
That was Louisiana.
Texas. Yeah, Louisiana.
You know that pretty well.
That's right. I forgot you lived in Louisiana.
It's like rainforest and rainforest. That's right. Pretty much the only thing we had. That's right. Well, our prayer is that this has been a blessing for you. If you have not gone back, if you've been listening to this whole episode and you've been like, what are they talking about? Go back and listen to our full sermons. You can find them on our YouTube channel. They're all there. You can go back and listen to the messages and then come back and listen to this again. And maybe that'll give you a little bit more clarity. But our prayer is that this helps you take another step in your faith journey, whichever step that is along the way. And if there's anything we can do for you, we would love to do it. Please reach out to us. You can find all of our contact info below. You can find us on Instagram and online at palmettochurch.org. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Grace and peace, my friends. Have an amazing day.
God bless.